we're kind of in the golden age of content in that the power is all with the content creator. You and I can sit here and do this and have this incredible conversation. You've got all the tools to edit this podcast. And it's kind of in your back pocket, right? Literally in your pocket. Like it used to cost a lot of money to have all these tools and have the professional expertise. So there's a lot that can be done. And I find that to be very exciting. The flip side of that is that we live in a very noisy world, right? There's so many platforms. It's really hard to break through. Mm. But I think that there are a lot of niche audiences that you can connect with. And I think that challenge is really fun and exciting.
Welcome back to another episode of A Measure of Passion. I'm really excited today because I'm interviewing something that is completely outside of my wheelhouse, which is a science or technical writer, editor. And I'm so excited to introduce Nicole Dyer. Welcome, Nicole.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and you are related to one of my favorite people, Sandy and Sandra, and she has told me about Nicole for probably the 20 plus years I've known Sandra. And I reached out to Sandra and I said, I've always wanted to talk to your daughter. This is a great way for me to interface with her. Do you think she'd be interested? And she said, yeah, I think so. And then Nicole agreed to be here. And Nicole has a fascinating bio and history. Like I said, it's totally outside of my sort of wheelhouse, but I love talking to really, really smart people. And Nicole is probably one of the smartest people I've talked to in this podcast history, I think, because of her background in neurobiology, and then started writing and being a science writer for different magazines, including Popular Science and Science Scholastic. And I really wanted to get into the brain of someone who started deeply in science, but also I think found the magic of being able to translate a very difficult subject matter into something that the common person can read and understand. So, Nicole, give us a little bit of information about how you went from a science background into writing. You clearly knew you loved writing, though to the best of my knowledge, you don't have a degree in writing. So sort of tell me how you transitioned or made that change from straight science into writing and writing technical subjects.
Well, Georgie, thank you for that kind intro. I don't know about smart, but I I did really fall into the field of science journalism. When I had graduated college, I had intentions of either going to medical school or getting a PhD. And I had landed at Columbia working at the Center for Neurobiology, and I was in a lab. I was a research assistant, a technician. And so my job was, working with sea slugs. Essentially, and sea slugs have this beautifully simple nervous system, and I won't go into all the sort of experiments we ran on them, but it was a somewhat of an iconic lab, and I had a lot of access to some very established professors. And I think had I wanted to pursue graduate school, I really could have used that as the launching pad. And I realized I absolutely did not want to do that. While I was there, a friend of mine was working at Scholastic, publishing. They do Clifford the Big Red Dog. I think they may have done Harry Potter. She worked on a science magazine. I started freelancing for her, and I just really loved the challenge of simplifying really interesting topics for a general audience. And I did that for a while, and then a job opened up, and I wasn't interested in pursuing the research world. And I think in hindsight, that was such a smart decision. I think one of the things I remember very clearly, this is a long time ago. This is in 1995. I'm in New York City. I think they're paying me like $21,000 a year. Happy to have a job, making it work. When you're that age, money is, you just don't need a lot. And so I felt like I was making a fortune at the time. But I remember in the lab meeting, this guy's name was Octavio, I believe, and he was from Italy. He was a neurosurgeon, and he's doing a postdoc at Columbia in that lab. So it was essentially, he's got a PhD and MD. He's a neurosurgeon. And I think at the time he was making like $50,000 a year and he had a family. And I thought to myself, how can this be? Like, that doesn't seem like a very, financially stable model. Here you have a guy who is like just brilliant. And he was, at the top of his game. And I'm sure he's very passionate about research, but that is a very specialized field in which you have to be purely brilliant and just purely in it for the discovery and thrill of discovery, because it's a very hard career path. And it's almost impossible now. I think, what's happening now is it's not great for training the next generation of people who have that kind of talent. And that wasn't me. But I found, instant sort of chemistry with the writing side, and that just led to a staff job at Scholastic, essentially. And that was kind of the beginning of my career in publishing, specifically
And
in science.
and go ahead and tell us, like, yeah, a little bit more of your work experience with writing. You left Scholastic, and where did you go after that?
So at Scholastic, I had an opportunity to go. I had a job offer at Popular Science, and must have been, I guess, in the early like 2000s. Maybe it was even a little bit before that, when publishing was still a thing. Right? We're still sort of at the apex. Um, I joined the staff of Popular Science. Um, Editor-in-chief there was a bit of a mentor to me, and I was very young. I was new to editing, but it was a very exciting time to be on a magazine staff, because you still had tremendous access, right? If you are a reporter from Science, people are going to take your calls. And it was a really creative, dynamic, very smart staff. We really had a ton of fun. And again, I don't think we were being paid great. The magazine world never pays very well, but boy, did we have a lot of fun. And I just loved the being able to switch topics all the time. I love the challenge of getting something I knew nothing about, learning all about it, being able to talk to these super smart people. I mean, we were interviewing like Elon Musk before he was Elon Musk. We were really at the cusp of a lot of great new technology, and I loved that. And I love my coworkers. And I think in hindsight, looking back, I didn't realize at the time that was probably the pinnacle of my creative career in some way, just because of the dynamic staff, right? How creative people were going into those editorial meetings. They were very competitive. You had to come with your ideas, defend them. And, we covered a lot of great things. And it's a little ironic that a lot of the things we covered are dominant today. And in some ways, there's never been a better time for that kind of reporting in the world dominated by technology. So it does leave some gaps. I did that for a long time. I ended up, think I stayed there for about 8 years, became features editor, had an opportunity to go to Discover Magazine as the executive editor there. And by that time, the writing was really sort of on the wall for publishing, because we were at the intersection of the rise of the internet. And the publishing world was really just refused to adapt. It was a real, just did not want to acknowledge the shifting landscape. So for a long time, there was a period where, newsstand sales were declining and declining. And the solution was always, well, let's change the editorial staff. Let's get a new editor-in-chief in. We'll get a new design director. We'll redesign. We'll redesign the cover. But really, that's just sort of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, because there's a seismic shift in how people are consuming information. Most magazines don't make the transition to the internet very well. They're either putting up content for free. So that's a long documented story. So I go to Discover. I'm not there for long, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. That publication had already been sold a bazillion times. It was purchased by a company in the Midwest, and they had no plans of keeping it in New York City. So
So before you go on, can I ask you, a lot of companies, part of my background is, the law of what keeps a company changing and thriving during these kinds of shifts. So I'm a business coach and really love James Collins' work about Built to Last, Good to Great, those kinds of
Mhm.
books. Well, just picking your business brain, given the fact that you are at a Popular Science and Discover magazine, what age, what year do you think was sort of that, turning point where one of those magazines could have done something that would have saved them? And what would that have looked like now that you were like, 15 years past that point? Looking back, what do you think and what year do you think would have been a pivotal year for either one of those magazines to make a significant shift to stay relevant in today's internet sort of writing world?
It's a great question, and I think, we can speculate about it in hindsight, although, um, you know, I can't remember the exact year. It was probably the mid 2000s when things were really just dramatically shifting. I might have my dates wrong. Um, but there was, I don't know if you remember, but there was a trend in which, um, a writer and critical thinker, I think it was might have been Chris Anderson, had talked about like the power of free, like what you get if you give away content for free. And that became the idea. Like what we really need are readers. So we're going to give away the let them come here. We're going to get traffic and we can sell ads against that. That model ended up being not a great model because the entire publishing industry kind of followed that, with the exception of like the New York Times, who, as you can see now, has a thriving, business that is their paywall, and they've really managed. That's a newspaper, but they have really managed that shift in a way that others haven't. Maybe Wired managed, but not so well. I mean, Wired is another iconic magazine that probably
Yep.
doesn't have much of a print presence. I haven't really looked in, I don't know a lot about their business model now because I've been out of the magazine industry for a while, but I think even at Popular Science, we were developing an iPad app. Developing a product that we could sell that really went nowhere because the industry didn't go in that direction. People weren't going to shift to iPad magazines, and this was really before social media, that this is all happening. So no one really predicted social media. At the time, I remember we were experimenting with Second Life. There are all these like little, I guess, precursors to what would come. But none of
For
them
sure.
really took off. I don't know if you remember Second Life, but I was never really into it. It's like this weird, like Sim City kind of world, and you have this avatar and this virtual personality. And so that was kind of like a precursor to some of the things that we have now. But I don't think anybody really saw, social media coming, and that was really the beginning of the end. Is that this shift to sort of user generated content?
Yeah, and I do agree with you. I mean, I know as I was transitioning into my coaching business, which, I mean, all the feedback was, oh, you can do this remotely. The internet is your friend. And, you give away a free session. And then after that, you'll get all these subscribers and make all this money. And so it was always about teasing the subscribers with a free session or free content. And that would then sort of be the business model for, long-term success. And like you, I didn't find that. I didn't know how to do that. It was really an undiscovered space to be able to do that with any kind of knowing. I do think that it worked for people who had 100% internet businesses. So like the software folks, I think, sort of knew how to harness that because that's sort of how the internet developed. And they were building everything in that same business model, which didn't necessarily translate great in every other industry.
Yeah.
It didn't work really in healthcare. Healthcare is always many, many years behind
Yes.
everybody else.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I mean, I grew up in healthcare. And so I didn't see any of that really happening. And the written word was really a big part of healthcare for a long time. And only now are things really more internet based or portal based or things like that. And so I'm sorry I interrupted your career
Okay.
conversation. And so I know you went from the publishing world and you sort of pivoted into healthcare yourself. And so let's continue that discussion about, where you went from there and how you landed where you are now in a health system.
So after I left um, Discover Magazine, they had been moved to the Midwest. I met first as a colleague now who was an editor at NYU Langone. NYU Langone is a large health system in New York City, not the largest in New York City, but sizable. And I knew NYU because of their research enterprise. So they happened to have a lot of very innovative scientists and researchers there. And I had covered some of them at Popular Science and at Discover. And so I started freelancing essentially for their publications in which they were covering their own research. And I found that really fun. That was sort of that was my wheelhouse, right? So I got to I don't have to be the scientist. I get to talk to them and I can dig really deep into their world and then move out, like just pack up my bags and move to move to another topic. And I found that really, really engaging. And I did that for a while. And then there was um, I had my son, and I was home with him for about 8 months. And then a job opportunity opened up to be the director of publications. And it was a really good job opportunity that just landed in my lap. I wasn't looking for it. I had a really good freelance life. It allowed me time with my son and a lot of flexibility. But I sort of in the back of my head knew that I needed to take this job because it was just put there and it's a really good one. And something I really wanted to do. But, I cried about it for like 4 or 5 months. I did not want to leave my son at all. And in hindsight, it was a very good thing to do, to push through that discomfort. And, he was 8 months and I was able to get really good coverage for him. We had a great nanny. And it really ended up working out. And I was able to kind of revitalize some of my career and move it in a different direction. Now, that new direction wasn't exactly journalism, but I tried to apply the skills of journalism to academic medicine, which they needed very much, right? The world of academic medicine, I know you're familiar with, can be very technical. I think researchers and physicians have a really hard time talking about their work in a way that is broadly relevant because they forget about the context part, right? They forget like people don't have a lifetime of understanding of what they're talking about and they need to be brought in and they need a bigger lens through which to see the story to build appreciation. So I had a lot of success doing that. And it was a lot of fun. So I was very happy with that transition and I'm still at NYU today. It's been a while, I guess 10 years, probably two. We could talk about that, but you stay in a place for a long time, it gets a little bit stale, but it's still a wonderful place and it's full of, very intellectually curious people and people who are doing very innovative work and that never gets old, really exploring those worlds. So I think that's the sweet spot for me.
I mean, I think every mom goes through that pain period that you talked about. You're in love with your baby and you can't imagine leaving the child alone because you fear missing the most important moments of their life. And yet, you have an opportunity and there's still a part of you that continues to want to, I don't know, make a difference or, sometimes you'd like to have an adult conversation. And, they'll bite, pull at you, right? And you sort of have to do the best you can with the information you have at that moment. And sometimes that means taking a leap of faith. Sometimes that means staying home with your baby and then trying to figure out what do you do when you've been out of the work world for 10 years and now you're ready to enter because your child has changed their focus and they want to hang out with their friends and do things outside of you.
Yeah.
And now you've got to recreate yourself. So I think as women, we're always running into that challenge, whether we choose to stay at home with our child or our children, or whether we go into the work world and then feel like we're abandoning our child and missing, the times that we just know we will never get again. So one of the things that in my life as a physician recruiter and working as an administrator with physicians is to, when they do community talks, is to remind physicians that, we need to talk and write at sort of an eighth grade level for most people that they're going to interact with in a community environment. And so tell me, sort of how you would do that. How would you take the technical information that you might find in like a Lancet magazine or a research magazine,
Mhm.
which is super, super scientific, just the statistical abstracts and all of that are so complex. And then how do you distill that into something that is interesting to the general person and really catches their attention and makes them read the whole article?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I've ever done it all that well. I've tried, but I think it starts with just curiosity. Like, when I go, oftentimes I know nothing about the subject matter, or very little. And so it's a puzzle. It's just a part of how my brain works. I love that puzzle. And so I can't explain it till I understand it. So it's a lot of processing. And the other thing is, you're talking to your source, right? So the researchers or whoever your main source is, if you have a conversation with them, I've often always found that they're able to explain it simply through a conversation. They may not be able to write it that way, but they'll help you work through your gaps in understanding, and give you the context and give you the big picture. And that's your starting point. So it's through that conversation. Obviously, you spend a lot of time reading it. You can understand the broad strokes. But it's through the conversation with your sources that you're really able to get those aha moments, those great quotes, the broader perspective. And so, in the process of learning something new and figuring out this puzzle, you're also meeting somebody new and learning a little bit about their world and picking up on their own passion for their research, why it's important, why they are studying it. And again, these often are folks who are just purely driven by curiosity. Scientific research happens, I think, can be a wildly creative field, although it doesn't feel that way for a general person because it's so technical. Eh, Science is a trade, right? You have to learn how to do it. You have to get a PhD because you have to learn how to use the equipment, run the assays. There's a lot of technical training. And so you have to peel all that back. And when you can peel it all back, you can really actually see that the people who are persevering are very creative in their execution. So you kind of have to, it's a people problem. Like you have to get to the person. Not all researchers are able to do it. And that's where you're going to find with your stories that your reporting is not going to be as vibrant as you want it to be because some people are just kind of shut down, right? They're not with you. They don't want to go deeper. They can't explain it. That does happen, but I found that the vast majority of people will run with you. Like they're more than happy to talk about themselves. They're more than happy to talk about their work, and they want people to understand it. A lot of the research that we're writing and reporting about is publicly funded. This is like taxpayer dollars. It's important to them to have people understand and appreciate where they're trying to go with it. So that's fun. I love the source part of it. I love the reporting part of it. Almost more than I like the writing. The writing's painful, can be painful. But the reporting is where you really start to follow these little breadcrumbs and start to see that you might have something. It's fun. It's a puzzle. Not everyone's going to have a good time trying to translate like, paper that's published in the Lancet, but I find it to be fun.
And do you feel like did you find more satisfaction in reporting on a topic that was sort of top of mind for everybody right now? Or did you get more satisfaction maybe from shining light to maybe something that was very little was known about and you brought it up to the surface? Can you reflect on what you found more pleasure out of, or was it really dependent on the person who was doing the research, regardless of the topic?
When I took on more and more responsibilities at NYU and director of publications and moving into their employee portal, some of the things that we're doing, because we're not journalists there, is you're getting stories from sources, so you don't have a choice. Somebody comes to you, science might be like, I want you to cover this. So you're going where the institution wants you to go for whatever reason they want you to do it. So sometimes you're choosing, but oftentimes you're doing it because there's a larger strategic reason why they want to shine a light on something. It's fun when you're writing about something that's topical, but we always try to make it topical, even if it's not. In the healthcare space for research, we always obviously are going to be looking for it's biomedical research. So the end goal is really improving human health and medicine. And sometimes you have, if it's a lot of basic research, you're really kind of extrapolating. You have to be careful that you're doing that responsibly because yes, you might be researching enzyme pathways and they may one day, have a benefit like breakthrough lead to a breakthrough in Alzheimer's. But it's a long if, and so you have to be careful about, overstating any of the claims. Sometimes basic research is just basic research. Like so much of the human body, we think we know so much, but we really know so very, very little. What makes it exciting. We probably know more about what's in the stars than we do what's in our own body.
Very, very true. Very true. The other thought that I wanted to share is that in my work in health, in the health system that I was a part of, we had a very strong marketing team. And as you had mentioned, there's definitely strategic priorities for the health system or a new service line or,
Yeah.
New developments within a service line that you're trying to get out. And I always struggled with what is the best way to go. And I do realize now that I'm away from that health system and I work more in the private practice environment, that it is still very valuable when you see a writing or presentations from a health system that is bringing you the news about what is the most recent development in a certain, disease system. Because as consumers of that information and living in this area, you still need to know what that is. So I definitely do feel like there's a good place for it. Now looking at where you want to go, Nicole, where do you think, I know you're very happy where you are now, but it sounds like you've always done a little bit of freelance work. And what are you doing now that's very exciting? Whether it's within writing or without writing, tell me what is it that gives you the energy to get up and, start shooting?
My role has shifted. I'm now more in a managerial role where I'm less on the creative end. I'm still doing creative work, but it's in a position where I'm helping stakeholders meet their communication needs and sort of creating strategies to help them get the message out or to communicate with different audiences. And it's more of a marketing role. I'm more of an edit. I'm pretty much a raw editorial person. I have been my entire career. I think, I like the storytelling process. I like discovering and meeting new people. I like meeting people who are energetic about what they do. And so, I really want to figure out how I take those skills and translate them into different things. I think we happen to be in where do we're kind of in the golden age of content in that the power is all with the content creator. You and I can sit here and do this and have this incredible conversation. You've got all the tools to edit this podcast. And it's kind of in your back pocket, right? Literally in your pocket. Like it used to cost a lot of money to have all these tools and have the professional expertise. So we can there's a lot that can be done. And I find that to be very exciting. The flip side of that is that we live in a very noisy world, right? There's so many platforms. It's really hard to break through. But I think that there are a lot of niche audiences that you can connect with. And I think that challenge is really fun and exciting. We've talked a little bit about, I've been experimenting with podcasts myself, my partner, and I have a sort of very amateurish, funny podcast about the growing world of women's professional soccer, unprofessional podcast about professional women's soccer. And that's really like a large experiment to understand the tools and to figure out what can we do with the content. And I find that to be really fun because there are a lot of fun formats, different ways you can cut up the content, different ways you can serve it up, different ways you can engage with people, different ways you can find your voice. So, I'm still exploring that world. So, there's that pure creativity that is really fun. But then, you and I both understand, like, you also have to, support a family. you have to monetize things, you have to make a living. So there's that balance too. So figuring out how to balance that while still feeling electric and alive and feeling like when you wake up in the morning, you're really excited about what you're going to do. So
Yeah.
I'm working
Yeah.
through that. Yeah.
Yes, and I do want you to be able to please give our listeners and our viewers how they would find your podcast, because I told you before we started, I thought it was a great podcast and I love the format of it. And I love the energy that you and your partner bring to the discussion. And it's just a fun thing. I think it'd be great to listen to on the way home from work, because it would lighten up the mood and it would make me interested about, okay, I can separate from work and I can come here. And on my short ride home, I can get a little burst of, fun before I go home and start with the evening routine, right? So please tell our viewers how they can find you.
So the podcast is called Deep in the D. And full disclosure, it is unpolished as can be. It's really a work in progress that we made the creative decision just to release it, because part of what we wanted to learn is, how do you even release it? You can find it on all channels. It's on Spotify and uh, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, as they say. It's called Deep in the D. It is called that because when we started watching professional women's soccer, there's a league in the United States called the National Women's Soccer League. We started watching it not long ago, maybe like 4 years ago, in part because there's a Brazilian player. Her name is Marta. She's like the female Pele. She's a legend, just a magical player. She's still playing. She's at the peak of, she's 39 now. She's signed a 2-year extension, but she's probably going to retire. But she's just a very inspiring person. She grew up in Brazil, learned to play in an impoverished area, had no shoes. Her soccer ball was like a plastic bag, bunch of plastic bags stuck together. And her trajectory is so inspiring. She plays beautiful soccer and had navigated her way from Brazil to the European leagues, and then came to the American league, and is just a very, very special, one of a kind human being. So we're like, oh, we got to watch this. And so she was our gateway, and we started watching the games. And we noticed watching it that there was a lot of talk about technical jargon, right? I'm somebody who lives and breathes technical jargon in the science world, but when I started watching soccer, I didn't understand a word they were saying. And they would say things like, oh, they're deep in the D, but we had no idea what that meant, And we found we had to do a lot of unpacking to even understand the sport. And it struck me as just the gap between having, here you have this sort of very small niche sport with a small niche audience, and they really want to grow their sport, but they're not meeting Americans where Americans are at. If you want to grow sport in America, you need to speak to Americans and understand that the vast majority of your audience is going to be people who don't really understand football, the European football, right? Soccer. Right. And so we thought there was a lot of opportunity to come at it through the perspective of a new fan. And that's the idea. We would bring people along for the ride as we were learning to understand the sport and all the weird nuances and, the terminology. If you're a European, you grow up watching this, it's like watching baseball. Like, I'm not confused about baseball. I know exactly what that's all about. But I think that's not the case in America. People don't understand the culture of the sport, and they don't understand the sport themselves, but they want to be there. The women's league is also fascinating because it's an incredibly family-friendly sport. They've done a wonderful job of bringing these elite athletes into these arenas, and it's a place where a whole entire family can go. You can bring, if you have girls who play soccer, little girls, you can bring the whole family there, and tickets are like $25. They can go down to the front, and these like world-class players, they'll come sign your autograph. I don't need an autograph, but my son loves it. It's exciting. And so you're getting this elite level sport, but in a family-friendly environment where you don't have to worry about getting a beer bottle in the back of the head. We take Abe to Yankees games, and he has a great time. But it can be a little dicey. You do have to leave before it gets dark. You don't want to, the fans can be very rowdy. So this league is appealing just because it's a different vibe altogether, and they still offer Access. It's very cute. It's like, there's one player, star player, she's just retired. Her name is Alex Morgan. She's a very pretty player, hits all the Americana, like, has all the looks. She's very talented. And she's an ambassador for the sport. So you go to a game, there's like, 5,000 10-year-old girls wearing her jersey. It's very cool.
Mhm.
It's very
Yeah.
inspiring. And so we really glommed onto that of like, this is something really special. This is something, that fills a gap for a lot of people and families and gives girls role models. A lot of the people who invest in those sports are actually men. They're former professional athletes, Eli Manning. Kansas City's doing something very special. I think Mahomes, the football player there, he and his wife are owners of that football team, the women's football team. They built the first women's specific stadium there, and it's packed. It's sold out every game. I find that to be so cool, right? That they're just
Mhm.
creating something from scratch. They want their daughters to have role models. So there's a lot of growth. It's just a cool opportunity. So that's what we're doing with that podcast. We're not consistent with it because it's a bit of experimental project for us. But I would say to anybody, that is looking for a creative outlet to embrace the tools. Don't be intimidated by the technology. It just takes a little patience to figure it out. Don't be afraid to let it be messy. We're going to let it all hang out there. You can go listen to Deep in the D, and you'll listen to a very messy, conversation, but by two, pretty enthusiastic folks. And the idea is that it will evolve over time to develop a little bit more polish as you get a little more sophisticated about the production. We would like eventually to have actual guests on the show, people in the industry. We didn't feel like we were really ready. We could have gotten them actually, because that's, this is still an industry that allows access. So it's very cool. It's fun to be on the ground um, of something like that. And I do think that I have a pretty good feel for things that could I just feels like this could break through.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
the
We do
growth.
too.
Yeah. So that's fun. And it's totally different than science, right? I love that too, that it gives me a break. Like I've been doing science journalism for so long. This is something totally different, but I can still apply that same mindset of like, I don't understand this. I need to translate it. I have a feeling other people don't have a clue what's going on either, but maybe they want to have a clue and want to appreciate the sport more. Women's sports are different too. There's more drama in women's sports. Like there's just more. I don't know why the league has a lot of drama in it. Maybe because it's new and it's harder to get off the ground. Maybe the men's infrastructure is just so developed that you don't hear a lot of these backstories, and maybe there is drama there. It just doesn't make the headlines as much. So women women's sports are a little different than the men's arena.
Mhm.
So we're
Yeah.
working through that as well.
Well, what I love is the fact that, part of aging is like recreating, right? And I think when we look at our younger selves from when we were teens and in our 20s and then in our 30s and 40s, I mean, part of it is about how do you stay in the game? How do you stay interested in your life? Because if you don't, then things don't go well. And I think what you're finding and maybe waffling through is how do you recreate that energy for something you had so much passion for? And this is this is a podcast about passion. And so to me, this is a great example of finding that transition point so that you can continue finding something to invest in, even though you're really busy. And I think that, you're sort of in the thick of things. Your son is at a certain age where he's still going to continue needing you. And even though he says he doesn't, you still need to be present because he's getting ready, for the next probably, 6 years to go into, high school and launch to college. And so, I mean, this is an important time, but you also need to take care of yourself and your psyche. And even if you are working in a 9 to 5 job and, maybe it's a little bit more predictable now, which is where, this was the perfect time for my podcast because I thought, well, I still have all this energy and I want to do something, but I also want to learn something and I want to take a little bit of a risk and put something out there and see if it gets any kind of a response. And it's a very small investment. It's more investment on my time, but it's been a fun adventure. And if it doesn't turn into anything, I can still say, hey, I tried it. I gave it my good, my best shot, and I learned something from it. And it is interesting how many people think it's really cool that I have a podcast, even though nobody asks me how many followers I have or how many subscribers I have. But I think people are still pretty excited about the fact that, somebody wants to dip their toe in this sort of new technology and try to, give it a go. And I think as long as we don't compare ourselves to the celebrities that have podcasts that automatically get, thousands and millions of viewers, we have to realize that we're just one individual trying to get a voice out there. And so it's going to take some time, and consistency is the name of the game. So, Nicole, this has been so interesting. I feel like you really shed some light on sort of the complexity of something I think is really difficult, which is writing, and especially technical writing, and the art form of making it really available to the everyday person who has an interest but doesn't know the language and doesn't want the technical information out there. And I'm so excited to see how this podcast or your journey continues in wherever it takes you. Podcasting may not be your thing, but you might find a different vehicle to get your voice out there. And I look forward to hearing your voice sometime soon. So thank you so much for joining me today. Any last thoughts before we close out this podcast?
Jody, it's been a pleasure. You're a pleasure. I love your energy. I love your enthusiasm. I think you're 100% right when you say it's about finding a way to stay interested in yourself, right? You have to find a way to cultivate that energy, and it does dip and wane, especially when you get older. You have to find a way to recreate it. And so I think part of the way you do that is you just do. You just do. You do things. You try things. And I admire your consistency in the podcast. I think it sounds great. It's very professional. I can see your passion for it, and I think it's going to pay dividends for you. It sounds to me like you're on an adventure and you put yourself out there. It's almost impossible for you not to create opportunities for yourself. So congratulations on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. I'm so happy you thought of me and welcome me on the show.
Well, it's been my pleasure as well to get to know you.